Jamaicans are voting this Thursday in general elections amid the deepest slump in decades. Joe Biden has spoken in Delaware about schools reopening and answered questions about the upcoming trip to Kenosha, Wisconsin. In Tunisia, the COVID-19 pandemic has strongly affected the healthcare sector with a significant shortage of medical personnel and equipment. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Laura Palmeiro. Jamaicans are voting this Thursday in general elections amid the deepest slump in decades after the pandemic torpedoed one of the biggest success stories in emerging markets. Holness called the election 3 weeks ago and justified his decision by stating that citizens need a new government despite the global health crisis. People who are infected with COVID-19 will be allowed to vote between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. However, to do so, they must wear a mask, a face shield, gloves, and disposable gown. An hour later, at 6 p.m., people held in quarantine as suspected cases, as well as confirmed patients' contacts, will also be able to vote. The Electoral Office of Jamaica informed that citizens will elect 63 parliaments, with the main contenders being representatives of the ruling Jamaica Labour Party and the opposition People's National Party. This Wednesday, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro called on the population to observe the 7+7 strategy aimed at curbing the spread of COVID-19 pandemic.
My recommendation is always this: let's respect the 7+7 method and we will do well. Let's go with 7+7 and it will be good for us. I know what I'm doing. We know what we are doing. 7 days of radical, conscious quarantine. Everybody taking care of themselves, taking care of our elders, taking care of our children, taking care of us all. And then, next Monday we will come to 7 days of flexibilization. Everything seems to indicate that we will have what I wanted months ago, the perfect 7+7, the 7 days of flexibility at the same time in the 24 federal entities, the 23 states and Caracas.
A Chinese scientific mission arrives on Wednesday to Peru, bringing a batch on potential COVID-19 vaccine to be tested on 6,000 Peruvian volunteers. Peruvian authorities and the Chinese ambassador in Peru welcomed the scientific mission, who brought some 12,000 COVID-19 vaccines from the Chinese pharmaceutical company Sinopharm, which will be the first to be applied to a group of 6,000 Peruvians between the age of 18 and 75 in the third phase of the clinical trial.
We have welcomed the team from Sinopharm, which has brought the vaccines needed for the clinical trials in Peru.
The ambassador and the Chinese people have been with us from the beginning, because only by standing together also in research we will be able to survive.
Today, the Chinese enterprise Sinopharm brought the vaccine with which we are going to cooperate in this third trial phase. I think this is a new landmark for cooperation between China and Peru in the combat against coronavirus.
In Paraguay, the increasing numbers of COVID-19 infections are threatening to spark the collapse of the health system during the second week of September. Meanwhile, the number of deaths could reach 1,000. We have more following the report.
Pastor Perez works at the Laboratory of Scientific and Applied Computing in the National University of Asunción. He reported that the confirmed cases double every 2 days and the number of deaths could triple in the next 15.
This is an estimated value for mid-September, that infections could rise to 750 to 1,000 cases. I repeat, the purpose of always trying to anticipate this kind of situation is, on one hand, to advise the authorities that they have to make a decision so that they can instruct on measures to try and slow the pandemic, and at the same time to promote citizenship awareness on this issue.
The team of experts from the National University of Asunción believe that if there are no changes in social behavior to stop contagion, the increase in the number of confirmed cases will follow this trend.
For mid-September, the forecast shows a total of confirmed cases between 30,000 and 40,000 cases. That is not an isolated value that we are doing with the methods we are using. Also, in other countries, they are talking about this kind of figures.
Official reports show that 55% of the health services dedicated to treat COVID-19 are being used. The Paraguayan Doctors Association foresees the imminent collapse of these services.
A 75% use of hospital services, probably all the capacities will be used quickly. I think that if things do not improve, if there is no decrease in cases, we could have a collapse by next week.
The National Union of Doctors of Paraguay expressed its concern about the lack of testing, which could create better conditions to treat the disease. In addition, they claim that the biosecurity supplies must reach all the health personnel.
We're concerned as a union because of the small numbers of tests being made. There is no guaranteed quantity. Some of the chemical supplies are not available. The testing is always delayed due to a lack of supplies, and what we request is to guarantee the testing at a national level.
85% of the total deaths from COVID-19 in Paraguay have happened in the last month. Currently, 620 doctors are infected and in isolation. 3 of them have died from the disease. In addition, the authorities admitted that Paraguay is a few weeks away from reaching the peak of the pandemic.
Osvaldo Sayas, TeleSUR Asunción.
A retired Army colonel arrested over crimes during the Uruguayan dictatorship has admitted to murder, kidnapping and torture, according to a letter revealed by the mothers and the relatives of the disappeared detainees. About 300 Uruguayans were victims of the forced disappearances during the dictatorship that ruled the country between 1973 and 1985.
Reads extract of official document. But it is important to highlight that I executed, kidnapped and tortured many people in various countries and received praise from the military's high command during the dictatorship and in democracy, up until and including last year, signed by Gilberto Vázquez. Let's be honest, we are relatives of missing persons. Our role isn't to investigate. The state should be the one giving a response to what happened, to the barbary the state inflicted on our relatives and on the whole of society. The armed forces knew where our relatives are. They are still responsible for the disappearance of our family members. Until when will this continue?
In commemoration of the 41st anniversary of the Nicaraguan Army, President Daniel Ortega congratulated all the military dedicated to the defense of the Central American country.
Dear brothers, dear comrades of the Nicaraguan Army, congratulations to all. Congratulations to your families, and honor and glory to those who gave their lives in the line of duty.
And Cuban animation producer Francisco Prats passed away in Havana this Wednesday. Known as Parco Prats, the filmmaker started working at the Cuban Institute of Cinematography, Art and Industry in 1963, where he developed a broad series of works in the cartoon department. This year, he was presented with the National Film Award alongside scriptwriters in El Paz as a recognition for his long and productive professional career, which included some of the most important Cuban works of animation, including the hugely popular El Pidio Valdés cartoon based on Cuba's struggle for independence from Spanish colonialism. Pratt's death represents a huge loss to Cuban culture and will be mourned by many across the island. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. U.S. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden has spoken in Wilmington, Delaware, about schools reopening and answered questions about his upcoming trip to Kenosha in Wisconsin. The former U.S. Vice President said reopening a school safely is a national emergency and that he is visiting Kenosha to bring people together following overwhelming requests to visit. Biden's campaign said he would hold a community meeting in the Midwestern city, the latest to be rocked by anti-racism protests after Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back by a white police officer on August 23rd. Democrats had planned to hold their party convention in the state this summer, but the event was forced almost entirely online due to coronavirus pandemic.
His administration had done their jobs. Let me be clear. If President Trump and his administration had done their jobs early on with this crisis, American schools would be open and they'd be open safely. Instead, American families all across this country are paying the price for his failures. President Trump may not think this is a national emergency, but I think going back to school for millions of children and the impacts on their families and the community is a national emergency. I believe that's what it is. Protecting our students, our educators, our communities, getting our schools open safely and effectively. This is a national emergency.
The International Criminal Court has condemned the imposition of sanctions on senior officials investigating alleged U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan, as announced by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo this Wednesday. The announcement made by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo includes the head of the International Criminal Court's Jurisdiction, Complementary and Cooperation Division, Fakiso Moshoshoko, and all individuals or entities providing material support to Bensouda and Moshoshoko to investigate Americans facing prosecution for war crimes or crimes against humanity. The sanctions authorize the U.S. government to freeze the assets that these officials may have in the United States, as well as deny them entry to the country. In a statement, the Hague-based tribunal reacted denouncing an unprecedented attack against the rule of law, stressing that these coercive acts direct an international judicial institution and its civil servants are unprecedented and constitute a serious attack against the court, the Rome Statute system of international criminal justice, and the rule of law more generally.
Today we take the next step, because the ICC continues to target Americans, sadly. Pursuant to Executive Order 13928, the United States will designate ICC Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda and the ICC's Head of Jurisdiction, Complementary and Cooperation Division, Fakiso Moshoshoko, for having material assisted Prosecutor Bensouda.
The first confirmed COVID-19 case in Greece's largest refugee and migrant camp has been confirmed, Greek authorities announced on Wednesday. The patient is a 40-year-old Somali refugee living in a Moria camp on Lesbos Island who has since been hospitalized. Meanwhile, the camp has been sealed off for 40 days, according to a statement from the Greek Migration and Asylum Ministry. More than 27,500 refugees are hosted mainly on 5 islands and the Aegean and overcrowded facilities, making up part of some of 100,000 asylum seekers in Greece. Over 10,500 infections have been registered in Greece so far. The director of the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control has noted that the number of COVID-19 cases compared to the population in Europe has climbed to almost the same levels since in March.
You may remember that at one point we have been already below 15, so there is an increase, and this increase we have been seeing now for more than 5 weeks. It has been a slower increase as we had in March. However, we are almost back to the numbers that we have seen in March.
The European Union has authorized financial resources to rescue for more than 10 airlines hit by the coronavirus crisis in recent months. An EU report revealed that among the airlines benefiting from rescue packages are Lufthansa, Alitalia, Condor, Air France, and KLM, TAP, SATA, SAS, Brussels Airlines, Austrian Airlines, and Finnair. Furthermore, the European Commission has relaxed community rules to allow member states to rescue airlines, but with certain limitations. Lufthansa has already been forced to give up slots on the main German airports in order to receive public aid of 9 billion euros, in order to allow competition between airlines. Air Europa could also be forced to give up some of its main routes if it wants to receive public aid from the Spanish government. Demonstrations continue to grow in Bulgaria on Wednesday to demand the Prime Minister Boyko Borisov and his government resign following corruption allegations. Thousands of demonstrators gathered at the National Assembly building, calling for political change and respect for democracy and fundamental rights. Meanwhile, dozens of protesters were injured and several others detained by police officers who fired pepper sprays to disperse them. Speaking at the National Assembly's opening session, this Wednesday, Bulgarian President Rumen Radev noted that Prime Minister Borisov's resignation was the only way out of the ongoing political crisis. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has pledged a constitutional reform in a bid to refuse the street protests. Massive cleanup operations continues in Mauritius following the devastating oil spill from a Japanese-owned ship which ran aground on Coral Reef on July 25. More than 1,000 tons of fuel oil were leaked into the water surrounding the country, sparking an ecological disaster. Demonstrations were seen in Mauritius' capital, Port Louis, over the weekend to protest the government's response to the disaster, following the deaths of 50 whales and dolphins in recent weeks. Prime Minister Pravin Jugnauth noted that 2 sailors were killed and 2 others missing on Tuesday after a tugboat assisting in the cleanup efforts collided with the barge. Meanwhile, Japanese authorities have stressed they will provide long-term assistance to help the Mauritian authorities to deal with the spill cleanup, as well as in other social and economic areas. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The COVID-19 pandemic in Tunisia has strongly affected the healthcare sector, with a significant shortage of medical personnel and equipment. The North African country had initially managed to contain the COVID-19 outbreak with early restraint measures. However, since June, it has seen a significant increase in infections after the reopening of the borders. The health sector has been the most affected one, while doctors report a lack of beds, oxygen and hospitalizations capacity, and that they do not have intensive care staff for COVID-19 patients. Tunisia records almost 4,000 cases of contagion and at least 80 deaths from the virus. United Nations officials offered a report on COVID-19 cases in Libya this Wednesday, while noting that the spread of the virus appears to be spiraling out of control.
The number of confirmed cases has more than doubled in the last 2 weeks, with 15,156 cases and 250 recorded deaths as of the 1st of September. Exponential increases are a worrying trend, with community transmission now reported in some of Libya's main cities, including Tripoli and Sebha. We are, however, looking at the problem through a keyhole, as persistent shortages in testing capabilities, adequate healthcare facilities, and contact tracing mean that the true scale of the pandemic in Libya is likely to be much higher.
Chinese health authorities reported 11 new COVID-19 cases in mainland China on Wednesday, taking the total number confirmed since the outbreak of the pandemic in the country to over 85,000. The National Health Commission noted that all of the new cases were imported, while pointing out that this was the 18th consecutive day of no local COVID-19 transmission. The number of new asymptomatic cases fell to 12 from 19 on Tuesday, while over 80,000 people have recovered from the virus. The death toll stands at 4,634. Heavy rain and strong winds hit the South Korean port city of Busan on Wednesday as Typhoon Maisak made landfall as a Category 2 storm just west of the city. The typhoon is forecast to be the most powerful in years and was expected to follow a similar route as Typhoon Miami, which left over 100 people dead and $3 billion in damages in 2003. Shortly before landfall, the U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center reported sustained winds of 170 kilometers per hour. It is believed to be just the sixth typhoon of Category 2, strength or higher, to hit the Korean peninsula since 1951. South Korea's Met administration forecasts a heavy downpours of more than 400 millimeters. The Busan municipality deployed tens of thousands of sandbanks around the city to fend off flood waters. Meanwhile, the storm troubles may not be over for South Korea. Another typhoon, Haishan, has been developing south of Japan, and several potential storm tracks have been making landfall on the Korean peninsula on September 6th or 7th. Authorities in the Democratic Republic of the Congo have warned of a worrying surge in cases of the plague amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Health authorities have recorded at least 65 cases of the plague and 10 related deaths in the eastern province of Ituri. The new plague outbreak appears to have started in June when a 12-year-old girl died by symptoms linked to the disease in a community where further deaths due to suspected cases of plague were subsequently reported. World Health Organization officials have noted that the figures have already surpassed the total recorded in 2019, when 48 cases and 8 deaths were reported. Meanwhile, the country has reported over 10,000 coronavirus cases and 260 deaths. Egyptian health authorities offered an update on number of COVID-19 cases this Wednesday. Ministry of Health and Population spokesman Khaled Magaed reported 165 new COVID-19 cases, taking the total number to over 99,000. Meanwhile, 798 people recovered from the virus, pushing the total number of recoveries to more than 74,000. The COVID-19 death toll stands at 21 so far. And we have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Remember to join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Laura Palmeiro. Thank you for watching.